if you're listening to this and you really like Dune, I'm super happy for you. Like, don't take it to be like, yeah, your experience sucked because I didn't like it. It's like,
no, if you enjoyed the movie, I do not want to take that from you. I'm glad you had a good time at the movies.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked it. And if it clicked with what you like about the Dune as source material, then, like, honestly, in all seriousness, more power to you. Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is Genre Vision. Genre Vision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And welcome everyone to another month of Genre Vision fun. We have what we're calling our Thanksgiving spread, a smorgasbord of different types of movies for you to enjoy in November. And we're kicking things off with a new release. Well, it was a new release last week, but we wanted to close out our Halloween month appropriately, and we wanted to give people a week to watch this. It's Dune, the Denis Villeneuve adaptation of the Frank Herbert novel. This is I'm gonna say this is technically the fourth attempt to bring Dune to the world of cinema. Well, I should say the fourth successful attempt.
Yeah.
This is obviously a property that has been so revered and so attempted over the years. Obviously, the Alejandro Jodorowsky one is quite infamous. The David Lynch 1984 version we did an episode on, so go listen to our thoughts on that. Then there were the two mini-series that premiered on the Sci-Fi Channel, Dune and then Children of Dune. And then we have this, Dune, or as it's called on screen, Dune Part 1. Now, because this is a new release, we will avoid, I think, spoilery talk for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's also been a novel that's been published for decades, so... And it's like a big popular thing.
But,
you know, I'll avoid spoilers for a while, but I don't think we're going to hold off for like a terribly long time.
No. But there are things that this adaptation does that I would consider, especially if you're familiar with the material, kind of spoilery. It does change some stuff up.
Okay. All right.
But this is obviously an extremely big budget production from Warner Brothers. It is pretty clearly intended to kick off a cinematic universe of its own. And we know that because they want to make another movie, part 2, and that there is an HBO series in development. Maybe that will happen, maybe it won't, but they're trying to. They want this to be a big deal. They want this to be not necessarily their Marvel, but maybe kind of their Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, something to that effect. They want it to be a big property, you know, from which other properties can spin off. Looking at the numbers now, I mean, for a COVID release, it has done well. It actually did way better than you and I thought it would, because you and I had the same instinct that this would tank. We thought that, you know, audiences wouldn't be excited for it, and they, you know, even if they went to go see it, they wouldn't get it. But it turns out audiences have liked it. It's done well. It's done fairly well critically. Financially speaking, it's done, you know, it's done, I think, probably as well as it could have given the current thing. And also, I understand it did fairly well on HBO Max in terms of streaming numbers.
I think there are reasons for that, which I don't think this is a spoilery thing to say, but Dune as a property is weird. It's got a lot of weird world-building sci-fi stuff. It's a property, a novel at least, that was born off the back of psychedelic drugs.
Psychedelic drugs and Orientalism.
Yes. So it's weird. And when we heard that they were making a movie of this and we saw the first images and stuff, I think both of us had the thought of, okay, there is going to be a lot about Dune, maybe not text-wise, but more texture-wise, that they are going to totally spit polish and sand off to make this as approachable as this property probably has ever been in adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, I really wasn't sure what the approach would be for a long time. And then, you know, when the first reviews started trickling in saying that, like, oh, it actually has been made really accessible, I went, okay, I wonder how they did it. Because, you know, looking at a director like Denis Villeneuve, he made Blade Runner 2049, which is not an approachable film.
Not at all. In all honesty, I kind of get the feeling that maybe he felt he learned a lesson making that movie.
Well, that movie tanked. Yeah.
Well, yes. Well, you know, but it has been extremely well reviewed, and I think it's we'll have to see how its legacy goes, but as of now, it's a movie that is held in very high regard, and that was going to be a tough thing to do as a sequel to Blade Runner.
Yeah.
So I think he learned a lesson from doing that. It's like, I can't actually make this too weird, because Blade Runner 2049 is a weird movie.
It is a weird movie, and it's a very contemplative and often quiet and introspective film. Whereas, the original Blade Runner is this sort of like, Ridley Scott sensory overload. Blade Runner 2049 was a much chillier and more distant film, and thematically, I think the material supports that. Dune, however, when you look at the text and like Frank Herbert's original text, it's really ornate and very intricately detailed living world that is rich with themes and politics and different factions and a whole lot of explaining. The whole meme before the movie came out, I mean, even for the last couple of years, when the movie was announced, was like, is this a movie that, people are going to have to explain to their significant others?
Right.
I think that's a genuine concern with Dune, is that I think it requires some explaining to a lot of people up front to be like, look, here's all the things that are going on, because the novel, as Frank Herbert originally published it, I mean, he really dumps you right in.
I will give the movie credit in that it made this accessible for all of the density that Dune has in terms of its world. This movie doles it out pretty well. For the most part, it is just going to be like, look, characters are just going to do a lot of telling you what's going on, or you're going to have to watch videos and shit, or holograms in this. Which I will say, one of my favorite scenes involves a hologram. So it makes it accessible. And in a larger sense, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to poo-poo that.
In adaptation, I think a lot of conversations had to happen about what can we delete or delay.
Delay, or just reform.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that they're holding off on they're either holding off on certain characters. For instance, the character Fade Routha, who is famously played by the musician Sting in the Lynch version. Fade Routha is not present in this movie at all,
or mentioned.
There are other key things about characters and things like how they're related that are really important in the novel early on, even, that don't come about here. And you think, well, okay, I know this is true in the book canon. Either are they just choosing to ignore it here, or are they delaying it to movie 2, and are they going to treat it like Empire Strikes Back type reveal? I don't know, because coming to this as somebody who really greatly enjoyed the Frank Herbert novel when I read it for the first time last year, the fact that they have removed as much as they possibly could to polish this down strips away elements of it that I feel are essential Dune. And so that's, in adaptation, I do find that there are some things that I sorely miss.
Well, let me be totally frank. That stripping down was work that was already done for the filmmakers, because they should pay David Lynch money, because there is so much indebted to his breaking down of the story and how to present it cinematically, that there are sections in this movie that, again, I know are from the source material and are represented there, but I was shocked, especially because, maybe this will add a little context. You and I watched the extended cut of Dune recently, the 1984 version.
The version that David Lynch refused to be credited with, so it's credited to Alan Smithy.
Yes, we watched that, and there were scenes in that I had not seen before that I was like, wow, they just did this scene exactly the same in the Villeneuve movie.
Yeah, I mean, they're staged the same. They take the same lines from the original Herbert text. It was kind of astonishing to compare the two cuts, of the current theatrical Denis Villeneuve Dune and the extended edition of Lynch's Dune. But I don't want to give credit where credit may not be due. It actually may not go to Lynch. It's odd because if you watch the extended edition, there is so much repeated exposition. They're constantly hammering home certain facts and ideas like 3-4 times over and over again, because it seemed clear to me that somebody, probably Dino De Laurentiis, was very concerned that people would be confused.
Well, especially because that version was intended for originally television.
Yes.
So it's like, we got to really explain this. But not to get too in the weeds of that version of Dune, The point being that Dune Part 1 is pretty much hitting all of the beats that Dune 1984 did in fairly the same structure. Again, that comes from the source material, but I think that the Lynch movie was really able to break the spine of the novel into something that could be digested cinematically.
And it's also no coincidence that this movie is a part 1 of however many parts they're going to do, and it takes the most interesting things cinematically from the text, because I feel like the cinematic moments in Frank Herbert's text are fairly front-loaded. You have the big memorable sequences like, the rescue of the spice workers at the spice harvester out in the desert, and the Duke and the other ships swooping down to get the workers and stuff like that. That's a very, very cinematic scene. You have the Harkonnens' assault on, the Atreides compound and the betrayals and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is very, very cinematic. The rest of the story that they're delaying until some future installment is much more an introspective tale about like how Paul Atreides, the hero of our story, changes to become someone else, basically, or sort of awakens to godhood and ignites this jihad.
And it's tied into particularly an understanding of consciousness and what is consciousness and
psychedelic drugs and poisons, basically.
Yeah. Yes. And so I'll just say that my big non-spoilery feeling on the movie is that no matter how well filmed or directed or acted or anything stuff in this movie might be, and there are absolutely moments that deserve pointing out like that, the overall vision of what this version of Dune is to me does not click. It does not interest me in the way that I've been interested in Dune before in the past.
Yeah, I think the visual style of the film kind of spreads out into beyond the visuals. I think it spreads out into the narrative adaptation. Like, to summarize what I'm feeling about the movie, the visual style of this film is muted in terms of color, and then also the construction of everything is very brutalist. Lots of like heavily angular geometric shapes, things smoothed out, and it's like everything has been simplified in terms of shape. There's not a whole lot of ornate features like you see that the Dune 1984 is a very Baroque film and very ornate and much more detailed in so many aspects of its design. I feel like that smoothing out and like the angularity and the simplicity and the brutalism of the visual style is also kind of present in how they adapted the story, and that all the interesting ornate nooks and crannies of this story, or at least the first half of it, have been sanded away and removed to make it more accessible. And I feel that it doesn't accurately capture the flavor that I want from a Dune adaptation. So did it fully click with me? No, there are things I like about it, but as a whole, I found it to be a little flat and shallow.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, my biggest kind of broad take in regards to this is that I look at the design aesthetic of the movie and as a big picture thing. There's more specific things that we can talk about, but I think about looking at a spaceship and I try to picture what kind of feeling does Denis Villeneuve get when he wants to see a spaceship. And it's to the point where there's a scene in this movie where he's like, I don't even want to see the spaceship. It's just going to be lights and a kind of a silhouette. And for example, when the Atreides first arrive at Arrakis, when they, get teleported essentially, through the guild pilots, the spaceship design and everything, it's so boring to me, which is interesting because it's the same kind of design aesthetic that we have seen in his other sci-fi movies like Arrival or Blade Runner. And in those movies, that aesthetic and tone worked. But in Dune, it makes everything feel really boring.
Yeah, it does feel like this is a world that should be much more ornate. There's this idea that you're supposed to be able to fold space using the spice. Use enough of the spice in a certain way, you become a guild navigator, and you have the mental capacity to fold space. And in the Lynch movie, this is realized in some really mind-bending trippy and like just even disgusting ways. Like these monsters shooting out these beams and folding space, and all of these ships having to pack themselves into this giant, I think what they call it, a Highliner ship. And in this movie, they simplify it to the degree that the Highliner ship just basically looks like this giant gray like toilet paper tube in space. And they do one clever thing where if you look through the toilet paper tube, you can see Caladan on the far end of the toilet paper tube, and then in the foreground you have Arrakis. And it's like, okay, they're telling a very simple story here visually, but they're not getting into the weird, intricate flavor that people like me really enjoy about Dune as a property. So the fact that they're skipping over all that stuff really bums me out.
It's not fun. And I think a lot of people will take offense to being like, Dune's not supposed to be fun.
Serious business.
Yeah, it's supposed to be austere and grand and important. And it's like, you can be those things and be fun.
I just don't understand why every planet, every culture, every ship, every building has to be austere and brutalist. It's like if you wanted to display a really big variety of cultures and languages and like be able to have us tell them apart easily, then I would say take more of the Lord of the Rings approach. You know, don't make everything sort of fall under the same design aesthetics, which is like austerity.
Right.
You know, give me some sense of greater variety. If you want to make this seem like a big, grand universe full of endless possibility, don't limit it to like one singular design aesthetic. That is my sort of like overall feeling on the movie. It's like, you know, there's so much opportunity in this universe, and to do it in a way that feels so greatly simplified and frankly like unified in its vision really does a disservice to how cool Dune actually is.
And can be. Yeah. I mean, this is part of that grounded realism movement that is clearly, it clicks with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it clicks with a lot of people in very strong ways where this is the only interpretation of certain ideas that they'll accept. You know, I don't think it's unfair to make a comparison to somebody like Christopher Nolan. I think that those same kind of stripped down ideas permeate those both of these people's work. But Villeneuve was at least willing to get really weird in some fun ways with stuff like Arrival's a weird movie. Blade Runner 2049 is a weird movie. Dune is not weird to me.
Yeah, it actually comes across as, you know, it is grandiose in certain ways, but it is also very consciously like Dune for normies in its structure and ultimately a lot of its sort of like narrative execution for sure.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, you know, normies is a bad word. Like we shouldn't use that.
It's true. Yeah, you're right.
But you know, it's trying, like we said, by making something as accessible as you can. It's like anything. It's like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's like certain iterations of Batman for me, where it's like, you're going to make something that will be accessible, but you're going to, like you said, you're going to remove a lot of the flavor. You're going to remove appropriately a lot of the spice that's going on in these kinds of stories that make them stickier or sharper or a little, you know, prickly, or weird. And I think that's my biggest overall complaint, with the movie. Otherwise it's like, movie's paced well. The performances are fine. Like, I don't think anybody's amazing in the movie, but nobody's bad. I don't remember being like, oh man, that was a bad performance. But
no, the thing that really disappointed me the most is like, a lot of the more interesting, like a lot of the characters I was interested to see, they only get like 4 or 5 lines. That's it.
Yeah.
I was like, fuck, damn it. Really?
I mean, I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here. It's like, if you like those characters, there's books and tomes full of that kind of stuff, and it's there for you. This is this version. Fine. But I think we can jump over the spoiler wall and talk about more specific things. So I do have some complaints about the movie. One of them being that this movie, who has screenwriting credits and a directing credit, primarily to men, tried to shift perspective to more of the female characters, of which there are plenty, and there are plenty important characters from Herbert's novel. But this shifting, I think, was kind of ignorantly handled.
Yeah, the whole opening sequence is now from Chani's perspective, which is an interesting choice, not an immediately bad choice, but then to essentially remove her as a perspective character throughout the rest of the film, only to give her a small handful of lines in the very last few minutes of the movie, basically, is like, huh. Because the only other thing she says between her opening monologue and the end of the movie is Paul. She just says Paul in visions.
That, yeah. She also leaves the movie with the most cornball, made me groan and roll my eyes out of my skull line of,
sure,
this is only the beginning.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, we're not so different, you and I. So yes, that was an issue. But then one of the decisions that they decided to make was like, oh, we want to focus more on Lady Jessica, Paul's mother. And it's like, fine, she's a very good character.
She's my favorite character from the novel, so I was excited to see them focus. Yeah.
Yeah, and Rebecca Ferguson does a good job. Like, no complaints here. But their decision, instead of actually writing new stuff or creating something new, was just to take beats that Paul has and give them to her.
Yeah, like giving her the litany against fear and that kind of stuff.
Well, and also, isn't the name that the Fremen are chanting when they get there, it's specifically her title. It's not Paul's.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think they're shouting Sayadina at her, which is her prophetic title. Everybody has about 6 different names,
Yeah.
Paul is Muad'Dib, Mahdi, Lisan al-Gaib, Usul.
Yeah, Kwisatz Haderach.
Yep, exactly. So
Paul Muad'Dib.
Yep, the list goes on. Paul just has many, many names.
And I thought there were moments where it was like they were specifically calling out whatever the Fremen's title for her as it applies to their prophecy about her. Because there is a scene in here which was deleted from the Lynch version in which the housekeeper, the shout-out Mapes, approaches her with the knife, and she has the, to live with prophecy for so long to see it, And it's like, they took that scene and the writing of it line for line from the Dune, from the Lynch version, which I was very surprised at.
So, I mean, the most grievous, I think, deletions from this are things like, okay, well, how can we make these characters simpler? It's like removing things like Jessica's the fucking Baron Harkonnen's daughter. How can you fucking delete that?
Well, I mean, to be fair, that's been deleted in previous adaptations. I can understand why that's a thing that would go, because it's like, well, that's just another complication to her character's motivations that may not matter to the ongoing plot. But I agree, that's a great complication for a character to have. Yeah,
and it also reveals the whole Landsraad to be very incestuous, which is...
Yes.
And they don't get into the whole Imperium and the Landsraad in this movie. They tell there is an emperor. They basically mention that the emperor exists, but...
Yeah, we don't even see him.
Yeah, I don't think they've even cast the Padishah Emperor.
No, Shanam IV is not in this and has not been cast yet as far as I know. And really, like you said, it actually shrinks the world of Dune in this movie. It makes it smaller.
It does. And I think that there is an argument, and it's not a bad argument in concept, that they needed to. That it was too big.
Well, that's part of that accessibility.
Yeah, exactly.
The bigger something is, the more just by nature unwieldy it's going to become for people to grasp.
Yeah.
So I understand that. But again, that means that a lot of stuff's got to get shaved off. A lot of stuff has got to get discarded. A lot of stuff has got to get retooled. One of my biggest complaints is this is a fairly joyless movie. I don't remember an attempt at humor. I think there was one.
Yeah, and it's not even a joke. It's the most broy excuse for a non-joke. It's smile, Gurney. I am smiling.
Yeah. It's gruff film bro humor.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, look, like Dune is not the source of 1,000 yucks. I get that.
It's not. The novel's not funny at all.
No, but that kind of attitude seeps throughout the entire adaptation. I have a couple examples, and these are going to be incredibly childish, but I back them up very seriously. So the still suits that the Fremen wear, that recycles their body's water so that they'll have something to drink. I believe this is in the novel too, but it was certainly stated in the Lynch film that they also process urine and feces.
Yeah, urine and feces are processed in the thigh pads.
But God forbid, there is not going to be any mention of caca poo poo or pee pee wee wee in fucking Denis Villeneuve's super serious Dune movie.
No, you'll have the audience giggling, and nobody wants that.
Exactly. No, good Lord, no. And that's the kind of attitude that it's like, man, like take yourself a little less seriously. Like it's okay. Like you can still make a serious, important, yada, yada, yada movie, but you can also have fun. And this is probably a complaint that is like super over analytical, but I don't care. I'm going to make it. The sandworms in this movie. First of all, I don't really like the design of the sandworms. I don't think they're that interesting.
No, I prefer the Lynch ones. Yeah,
absolutely. But I'm very interested talking about this kind of sanding off and taking away some of the stickier, ickier stuff, is that the sandworms in pretty much all depictions, not just the movies, but other illustrated stuff and, you know, the games and all this kind of stuff, they are, I think, very fascinating combinations of phallic and yonic imagery. They're these big giant dicks that open up and become huge vaginas. It's very visceral to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a Giger thing in that it is sort of like viscerally disgusting, but also fascinating. It also, if you want to read into it even more, you know, the whole idea that Paul is not just a boy, but he is actually a blending of several different things. You know, he is Atreides and Harkonnen. He is sort of this blend of male and female. He is Bene Gesserit and Mentat. You know,
right.
He represents a lot of dualities, and they don't really get into that in the story, here at least.
Well, what's interesting is that for as much as they wanted to tout that, oh, you know, we're going to focus more on the women characters and there's going to be more female perspective, there's still this very bro feel to Paul as a character and the world in general. And so with the worms, they can't look like dicks and vaginas. That's somebody's going to giggle. So instead, now they have been unisexed into big buttholes.
No caca pee pee jokes, Drew. Look, I think you're reading a little too much into this, but like I will say the design.
I don't think they sat around and was like, we can't have dick vagina worms. They got to be buttholes.
No, I know that, but you're talking about the unintended consequences of their designs. But the whole like idea that, you know, Denis Villeneuve spent a year designing the worms is like, really? Stop.
That's
like,
the best you could come up with?
Really? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Tremors for life, baby. You want to talk about sandworms.
I do like that the idea that instead of like the worms having small teeth, they have these very, very long teeth, kind of like, it almost looks like whale baleen, like they're filter feeders.
Design-wise, it's not interesting. Like, I just don't find it as, you know, because this is supposed to be the big, awe-inspiring thing in the Dune story is Shai-Hulud.
Sure.
Is the worm. This is a god to the Fremen.
Yes.
And I just don't get that feel from this particular design. Like it doesn't inspire the kind of awe, you know, and granted, maybe part of that is because it's totally digital. It's not a practical effect like they were in the Lynch films.
Yeah. And there's also this idea that, these are supposed to be monsters in one sense of the word. You know, they're classic movie monsters. Carlo Rambaldi's design and the execution of the effects in the 84 Dune capture what is great about like a giant movie monster. This doesn't really do that. You know, the most interesting thing we see of a sandworm in this Dune is the big sort of like engraving on the wall that Paul looks at, you know, sort of revering it as Shai-Hulud is like, okay, that's an interesting idea. I like this sort of religious iconography of the worm. That's cool.
Sure.
But the actual worms themselves, hopefully they do better with them in the next one.
Well, because the next one's when it gets fucking weird.
Supposedly, you know.
Hopefully. There are things that I liked, and one of them is I think Denis Villeneuve's entire vision and aesthetic in general, not just from this movie, but his other movies, the only place it makes the most sense and works is with the Harkonnens.
Yeah, for sure.
This is the one part where I'm like, yep, you know, I don't know exactly. I know when Jodorowsky was making his movie, his whole idea was, well, each different house, each different kind of part of this world, I'm going to give to different designers.
Yeah.
And I'm not looking for necessarily a unity of design. I want everything to be starkly different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's much more exciting to somebody like me who is like, oh yeah, I want to see the difference in these worlds. I want these worlds to look complete. I don't want the Atreides place to kind of just look like a less oppressive version of the Harkonnens place. I should say probably maybe my favorite out of the whole movie might be Stellan Skarsgård, and he's not in it a bunch, and he's just got to, you know, be like, well, we'll get the Atreides. Like, which fine. He does that very well. The makeup is great. He looks really good.
Yes. I like the costume choices with him.
Yes.
And one of the more interesting almost whimsical ideas in the movie is that the Baron has a human spider.
Yeah. They obviously, again, sanded off a lot of the more problematic issues that people might have from the source material.
Sure.
But they didn't, I mean, like, Lynch had that awesome heart plug scene, which I love in the first Dune.
Oh, yeah. Well, it really makes the Baron very, very arch. And I can tell Villeneuve does not want to do anything arch,
Well, it's also, and I mean, this is icky warning. It just takes away any of the sex that is present in the Dune novel. And unfortunately, a lot of the sex in the Dune novel is, I mean, certainly 100% when it comes to the Harkonnens is bad, nasty, bad.
Yeah. Well, spoiler alert here. Paul Atreides is the grandson of the Baron Harkonnen because Jessica is, the Baron's daughter. And at one point, the Baron asks for a boy who looks like his grandson to abuse. It is gross.
Well, because regardless of that element of the source material, like Kenneth McMillan's performance in Dune, it's like, yeah, he's creepy.
Yeah.
Like he's, pawing all over the kid, and then he pulls out his heart plug and he looks kind of almost.
Well, he's wiping the blood all over the kid's chest. It's like, it is gross and sexual.
Yeah. Without having to be direct.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, no, you were able to imply that exact meaning by doing something that's weird and sci-fi.
Sure.
Which is the power of genre.
But if you're going to do something for the kids, a big PG-13 thing that is going to spawn multiple properties, the Baron can't be a pederast.
Yes, there is no sexual terror or menace to the Baron. Even I was expecting it when he had his, showdown moment with Leto. I was like, well, this will be the moment. Like, this will be when Stellan Skarsgård is finally like, yeah, he's going to creep out. This is when he gets to be creeper guy. And no, he's just, again, kind of the big influence I feel with this interpretation of Dune is Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I get that because, of course, Game of Thrones was an enormous, gargantuan international phenomenon. And so this feels like the Game of Thronesification of Dune. Now, granted, those elements, royal intrigue and all of this, kind of stuff, politicking between different feudal houses and stuff, that's all in the book. But I feel like that was the thing that the studio said, focus on that for this first movie, at least, because that's the kind of stuff we know people like, because we're Warner, we own HBO, and we need a new Game of Thrones.
Right. They essentially would say, like, look, we've got an audience primed for this kind of stuff. So if you can make it like Game of Thrones, why not?
So it feels very much like Warner's sci-fi pivot for a Game of Thrones type property. But, they wanted something that was a recognizable IP, and hey, look, Dune, we own Dune.
Dunk.
So that kind of stuff, while certainly intriguing, I will say one of the best moments in the movie has to do with royal intrigue, plotting stuff, and that is when the assassination attempt on Paul. That's probably the best scene in that regard.
Yeah, and I liked the interesting insectoid design of the hunter killer or hunter seeker, whatever it is.
It's fine. But him stepping into the brambles of the hologram that he was watching with the little Muad'Dib mouse. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, that's probably the best image in that movie.
It's pretty cool. Yeah.
That's the one where I'm like, you know what? That's a good, cool, and weird idea. Like, that's a weird idea.
Sure. Absolutely.
Like, to be and it's like, yeah, more of that. But for the most part, the movie doesn't seem to want to be weird. And, I don't know how much I can keep saying the same thing over and over again. Like, it's just not the interpretation or an interpretation of Dune that really harmonizes with what I like about the source material.
Right. And that's not to say that this is an awful movie. I think you and I would both rate it like 3 out of 5.
Yeah, I gave it 3 stars on Letterboxd. No like.
Yeah. Well, that's your whole Letterboxd system is a mystery to everyone, I think, including you. But
no,
did I hate my time with it? Certainly not. But it's not what I like about Dune, and I would consider myself a fan of the novel, especially.
Yeah, I've only ever read the first novel, and I played the Dune 2000 RTS game, and I've seen all the film adaptations up to this point. including the documentary on Jodorowsky's Dune called Jodorowsky's Dune.
Because I'm a glutton for pain, I'm thinking about rewatching the miniseries.
I don't know, like maybe. I remember Children of Dune being really rough. Like I couldn't.
Well,
like, that one was
that
really
gets
bad.
that shit gets weird. I've only read 2 of the novels. I've read Dune and I've read Dune Messiah, and even that by the end of it, it was getting a little fucking weird for me. I was like, Frank, you're losing me. You're losing me, pal.
This is what's interesting. Like after a certain point, there is a giant worm with an Atreides face in that franchise.
Leto the Second.
Yes, and people are like, oh yeah, let Denis Villeneuve go that far, and I'm like, why? Because it's going to be boring as shit. It'll be like a worm in a cave that's super shadowed so you can barely even see its face. Like that would be Denis Villeneuve's take on a giant human-faced worm god man. Like he just does not seem to be as invigorated by the bizarreness of Dune.
Yeah, and we've had a similar sort of movement happen in superhero films where, in the 2000s, superhero films were kind of afraid of doing their source material justice by featuring the same costume designs. It's like, well, no, that's silly and it doesn't look good, and they were afraid of it. And gradually, comic book cinema has found ways to embrace things that people like about the comics. They do it in ways that, will annoy Drew and me because we're, highly annoyable people, I guess.
I mean, here's the thing is that I'm glad that we're at a place where these kinds of stories, like people bemoan superhero stuff and this kind of genre stuff being the only blockbuster cinema that's being made. Like nobody's making, $100 million movies for adults anymore. It's like, yeah, because nobody's going to see them anymore. Yeah. Nobody went and saw The Nice Guys. They should have. The Nice Guys is great, but those movies are dead. I mean, not dead, but
they're not a theatrical draw. They're not a theatrical draw anymore.
Well, and they're only going to get fewer and farther between in terms of being big event cinema because it's about IPs. It's about recognizing things. It's about the least possible risk that these studios can take because these things need to make big bank.
Yeah.
So they can't be big risks.
Yeah, they have to be surefire hits in development. So
right.
That's something that, you and I really doubted with Dune, but it appears to have kind of pulled it off. And like one of the ways you can tell, like one of the barometers of whether or not this is going to be successful in American pop culture is, and it kind of pains me to say this, but like it's true, is like how much meme content can this generate? Like how much user generated free content will actually be inspired by this?
Right.
And it turns out a shitload. So people are aware of Dune culturally, very aware, and that's good for Warner Brothers in terms of making money.
Well, let me say this because I if there are any, rebuttals or issues with the things that we're saying, and any of that boils down to, well, let it play out. There's another movie. We've only got this one movie, and this is the only thing that we can grade itself on.
Yeah.
So that's what we've done. However, I will give Dunk Part 2 the benefit of the doubt because the most intriguing thing that happened in Dune Part 1 was its credit sequence. Because its credit sequence implies the possibility of something psychedelic.
We can only hope. I mean,
if that's the tease and it's not paid off in a way that I because those credits where it's like, ooh, all the letters are pulsing different colors and it's getting almost like this is getting a little 2001-y, like in terms of its visual color, just abstract stuff. And I'm like,
I sincerely hope that Warner Brothers and Villeneuve want to go there for the second installment, which has now been officially greenlit.
I mean, because at this point, the things that we see, and there's nothing truly psychedelic. All visions are just flash forwards and things like that. It's like, no, I want to see a movie that is trying to depict the idea of supernaturally expanding your consciousness
outward and inward.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the cool thing about it. And, another conversation that I think needs to happen about this is a conversation about format and, large format, long format. Was this really suited to be a movie?
I mean, technically it is a movie. It's a film. We all get it.
Yeah.
But for me watching it, knowing that there are these other deals in place, knowing that there's all this talk of this, I'm like, I feel like I just watched a pilot. Part
of that feeling is knowing now that there is another part coming and that they're already spinning this off into a TV show that might happen now as a showrunner. So there's stuff happening. It's in active development. I do get some of that same sense from you. Here are some of my worries, though. We look back at like It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. It Chapter 2 is disastrously bad, I think. And part of the reason I think it wasn't very good is that they actually had quite a bit of time between the first and second one. And they readjusted their approach.
That's true.
Instead of making the two as a duology and like trying to write a whole thing, they actually had more time to look at audience response and go, what are audiences responding to? What are they liking? Let's do more of that.
Sure. And, to It Chapter 2's credit, it does some bold, weird stuff. It doesn't work, but it tries that.
None of it works, no.
I am okay with something like Dune doing bold, weird stuff, because at this point, I just want to know, it's like, Denny, are you even interested in that part of the story? Like, is that, like, has Denis Villeneuve, like, what's a Denis Villeneuve acid trip even look like?
I don't know, but, like, I do not see in a second movie introducing the Padishah Emperor and Feyd-Rautha and all this stuff, and the movie eventually ending with, the death of the Padishah Emperor and him, in this arranged marriage to Irulan. Like, I do not see Denis Villeneuve by the end of a second movie doing all that.
No, I mean,
there would have to be so much more world building in this second movie to get there.
Well, here's the thing. If they have a show that comes out now, they can just be like, well, you got to do your homework and watch a whole 13 episodes.
They can't do that because, I mean, people.
No, they shouldn't.
No, they won't do that.
They can. What's Marvel been doing? Like, that's been a successful model.
Yeah, but their movies still work. Their movies still work if people haven't seen every installment.
It's true, but that can be, but Denis Villeneuve's making serious business stuff. He's not making Marvel popcorn stuff. He's changing cinema. So, like then he has to change cinema however he wants. And, I have to say, after Dune Part 1, even though that little tease of like, maybe things will get trippy, I'm like, I really have no propulsion going into the next Dune.
Right.
Because I'm telling you right now, when they start making that movie and they start putting out ads, you're not going to see any psychedelic weird, like, I just drank worm barf and now I'm a god.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's going to be fight scenes.
It's going to be the stuff that sold the first movie and stuff that people liked about the first movie based on audience reaction, which means it's probably not going to be what you and I want out of it. So
it's going to be like, let's get another hot guy to fight in a hallway.
Well, there's no Momoa in the second one.
No, but they'll have Feyd-Rautha, and Feyd-Rautha will have some, like, we got to show he's a badass, so let's have him fight a bunch of people in a hallway.
Yeah, knowing them, they'll be like, oh, Chris Pratt is Feyd-Rautha.
Don't you put that evil on me.
Just you watch. Just you wait and see. They're going to find some guy that makes money, and they're going to be like, well, we got to cast him.
Yeah. We'll see how that goes. But, I mean, maybe we won't. I mean, if people are interested, obviously, when Dune comes around in, 2027 or whatever.
Dunk 2.
Maybe we'll do it. But, yeah, like, for Travis and I, this just doesn't lock into the stuff that we find really, really invigorating about the story. So I think with that, we can head over to the shelf where we can pick some movies that act as good pairings or replacements for our main topic. And we want you to go to genrevision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks, because the shelf is a collaborative thing. This is the Genrevision Movie Club, and we're building this giant video store, for lack of a better term, together. And that's what the shelf is. So we want to hear your picks. And if you do submit a shelf pick, we will feature it on next week's show. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Dunk Part 1?
If you're looking for a really serious, brainy science fiction story with a very dark and serious tone, but also that touch of like trippiness and whimsy and, brushes up against religion and philosophy and like talks very directly about these things, things that I like about Dune, you should watch the show Devs, which was the product of Alex Garland making a show for FX that FX basically dumped onto Hulu. So I would think that a lot of people would find it distancing and like way too chilly, but I found some of the cinema going on in Devs to be fairly stunning. Mm-hmm. It is weird. It is definitely fucking weird.
I didn't even finish the show, and like, I there are things that are sticking with me from it. I will finish that show one day.
Yeah.
It'll mean I have to start rewatching it, but I second your recommendation. It's funny that you mention it, because while I was watching Dune, I had the thought of like, man, I wish Alex Garland did this.
Sure.
because I think he finds the balance between, he has his cool, chilly aesthetic as well, but he's not afraid to get really weird and really introspective.
Sure. Yeah. And, openly philosophical. And he also understands that, like, when his characters are waxing philosophical, like, he understands when those characters are sort of insufferable about it. Nick Offerman's character on the show is playing very against type for Nick Offerman. And he kind of knows that the character is, sort of an insufferable, pontificator. But he manages to infuse it with a lot of pathos at the same time. It's a cool show. Hardly anybody I know watched it, but it's totally worth a watch. Super fucking weird. Awesome designs. There's this big supercomputer that a lot of the show takes place inside of. It's basically a building that's a supercomputer. It's the devs building. And I won't reveal what the devs computer does, but you'll have to watch the show to find out. It's pretty fucking cool. Anyway, that's what I'm pulling off the shelf. What are you pulling off the shelf this week, Drew?
Well, I'm not saying that this movie should be how far Dune should go visually, or certainly not tonally. But if you want a big gonzo sci-fi blockbuster movie, watch Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, or the Planet of a Thousand. I don't know. City of a Thousand Planets. That's what it is. I just call it Valerian. That's what everybody knows it as. It's an adaptation of a, I believe, French comic book. And while I think the leads are kind of wonderfully miscast in that movie, like, they're so wrong that it's kind of fascinating.
They end up adding to the whole, like, gonzo aspect of the movie.
Right. Exactly. They're very much game for what's going on in that movie, but they're so out of place and they don't know it.
Yeah, and the romance doesn't work at all between them, but it's kind of fascinating to watch how it doesn't work.
It is. Yeah, it's one of these things where, like, the fact that it doesn't work actually makes it more interesting and makes you lean in more.
Yeah.
But it's also it's a movie that is absolutely littered, overflowing with style in terms of design. And I mean, there's not, like, no two characters look alike practically.
No, I mean, the alien designs and the ship designs are, like, incredible. Love it.
Oh, I mean, even removed from the greater movie, the opening credit sequence establishing how Earth became, part of this giant federation of different alien worlds. That opening sequence is awesome.
It's pretty stunning. Although it really doesn't hold a candle to the one scene where Cara Delevingne wears this giant white hat, this huge, like 8-foot wide brim white hat. And then it ends up being like a big citrus juicer, like a big citrus reamer on top of her head. They got an alien is going to use to eat her.
Eat her brains.
Yeah, that's...
that shit's I mean, that's
so insane.
Rihanna is a shape-shifting kind of fish person.
Yeah, Ethan Hawke looks like a touring member of Power Man 5000.
Yeah, the entire concept of the big opening action sequence, which is this marketplace that exists in, like, a dimension just beside ours.
It's partially in virtual reality, basically.
Yeah, well, yeah, something like it's just littered with fun, weird ideas.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And is uninterested. What's interesting is, like, its idea of being cool is that it's uninterested in being what you think is cool.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very in love with itself. And that means it's indulgent in the extreme, but a much more pleasant indulgent than I think the kind of mindset we saw with Denis Villeneuve and Dune. Again, I'm not saying that, like, yeah, this is how they should have done Dune. It's like, no, but if you're wanting a sci-fi experience that really is, it is fun, but it's also weird and colorful and distinct. Like, there's just it'd be impossible. I would love to look at a coffee table book of all the concept art for this movie. Because it would just be, thicker than one of those giant versions of the Bible, like, just littered with great stuff. Check out Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. But now we will head over to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Goosebumps, which was our Goosebumps television show. Eric Fuchs went with the Twilight Zone episode, The Masks, one of my favorite episodes of the Twilight Zone. And also Wolfwalkers, which I've still not seen.
So good.
Stephen Nesbella went with Gargoyles, the 1972, I believe it was a TV movie, and I think the effects were by Stan Winston, a very young Stan Winston. JT went with the original Choose Your Own Adventure books, The only one I ever remember reading of the original series was like a Space Vampires one. Mr. Milksteak went with The Monster Squad and Summer of '84, which I don't think I finished. I think I started that and bailed on it. Did you see Summer of '84?
I did.
Yeah, how was it?
It was pretty decent.
Maybe I'll go back to that because I think I started that and was like, I'm not feeling it. Then never went back to it. But thanks, everybody. Love seeing these shelf picks every week. It's one of our favorite things about the show. And I am very interested to see the shelf picks for Dune Part 1. Now we have some quick calls to action, but stick around because Travis and I are going to talk about what I think is the most hated entry in the Friday the 13th franchise. If you love what we do here, please, please, please rate and review the show on the Apple Podcast Store. Reviews and ratings, they do way more good for the show than you probably think they do. If you do leave a written review on the Apple Podcast Store, we will feature it here on the show. Even if it's a bad one, we've done it before. And if you really want some more genre vision in your life, you can go to patreon.com/genrevision and you can become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. And you will get access to hours upon hours upon hours of additional bonus material, including weekly pre-shows. The pre-show we did this week was actually talking about what we're going to do for next month in December. Things can always change, but we've locked down some pretty good titles, I think. And if you want to check that out, it will be at patreon.com/genrevision. You'll also get access to monthly extended currently consumings that we do, and bonus material for all the Genrevision shows, patreon.com/genrevision. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
And Travis and I are going to talk about a movie that Travis saw for the first time at my prodding, in which I got him to watch Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. But it should be said we watched the unrated version. And this was one I was thinking about because I hadn't actually revisited this in a long time. But one night I was putting on the Crystal Lake Memories documentary, falling asleep to it, and got up to the Jason Goes to Hell part, and I was like, I want to know what Travis thinks about this movie. Because, first of all, you're not a slasher fan, and you're not a big Friday the 13th fan.
Nope.
It's really not something that interests you. And I was like, this is such a departure. And it was pretty much reviled because of that I was like, this is something I want to get his take on because I want to see, and I wanted to revisit it. So we watched it and I think we both walked away thinking like, that's a pretty darn good movie.
It is. And I was totally surprised. I had heard all sorts of bad stuff about it that, it was this bizarre thing where in the first sequence of the movie, Jason is blown up by a rocket. The feds come to get him basically, and they blow him up, and it's like, okay. And the rest of the movie, Jason is a spirit that travels around from person to person, and he uses those bodies of various people to kill others. And I thought, well, that's not what a Friday the 13th movie is at all now, is it? And audiences agreed, it seems. They did not like that whole riff on it, and so I considered it, something that I wouldn't be interested in. But when Drew turned me on to all the things about it, I thought, okay, all right, this is worth a look.
And first of all, that explosion on Jason is amazing.
Well, and it's a hell of an opening sequence too. Like, it's legitimately well directed and atmospheric. They get this stunt performer to, appear as like the sort of like naked babe for the scene, but it turns out she's like a federal agent who can run fast, and like she runs around in a towel and it's like leaping over the hoods of cars and like sprinting full speed. It's like, damn, the woman can move.
Yeah, and that towel is glued to her body.
It had to absolutely be fucking glued. But it's an impressive sequence nonetheless. And then to blow Jason up so that his like body parts are flying everywhere, before the credits even roll, is like, wow, that's a bold idea. And, it looks incredible.
I have to imagine this was planned, or at least attempted, or maybe it was the most happiest of accidents. When they blow him up, his head spins around going up. It's amazing. Like, it's a truly impressive effect. And then the K&B, the famous effects team, did the effects for this. And this was also the first movie where Paramount allowed the rights on Friday the 13th to lapse in a way. And New Line scooped it up, but Paramount still held the rights to the name Friday the 13th. So New Line was like, okay, well then our movies are going to be called Jason.
Right. And they still called it Jason Goes to Hell the Final Friday. So it wasn't a mystery to audiences.
Yes. Interestingly, the Final Friday sounds like another, final chapter, but the reasoning was that this is the last time we're going to call it Friday anything. Because obviously the most probably notable thing about the movie that everybody knows is the ending in which Freddy's glove comes up and, his hand, not just the glove, but Freddy's hand comes up with the glove on and pulls Jason's mask down. It's like, oh, this wasn't going to be the end of anything. They knew what they were doing. But this is, in all realisticness, I understand if people are like this. I compared it to New Nightmare, where New Nightmare is my favorite movie of the Nightmare franchise, but I understand it's not really a good Nightmare on Elm Street movie.
It's a variation on the formula, but it's actually a variation that's far off enough that would have turned people off and go, well, this isn't close enough to the formula. This isn't what I want. And Jason Goes to Hell violently defies the formula to the point where they actually had to shoot a sequence in reshoots that was like, okay, campers going into the woods, having premarital sex, and then Jason in the body of the, coroner massacres them in this fantastic effects sequence.
What might be the greatest, as far as an effect, kill of the entire franchise.
Yeah, the chick on top of the guy in the tent, and then her getting speared, impaled through the middle, and then the whatever a weapon it is ripping up through her is like, oh my God. A really gasp worthy moment, incredibly violent. This movie is shockingly violent. You and I watched the unrated cut. It was like, astonishing.
The reputation the Friday the 13th movies have are like, oh, they're these extremely overly gory movies. And it's like, no, the MPAA cut them to ribbons, almost every single one of them.
Yeah.
And some way worse than others.
7's unwatchable to me.
Yeah. And so when Jason Goes to Hell came around, the home video market had exploded, and they specifically made the movie knowing we will submit a cut that we know will be R-rated, but we're filming everything for an unrated home release. Mm-hmm. So they got to go nuts. And in some ways, it's not the kind of nuts you would think from a Jason movie. It's not, oh, well, that means we get to, rip, tear, and impale a bunch of people. It's like, no, we're going to have a guy melt, and he's going to melt crazy.
It's an incredibly, well done body melt. And then there's stuff like, the coroner is going to suddenly get the urge to, eat Jason's nasty rotting heart and mush it all over his face. And it's like, this is viscerally gross and disgusting. Just exciting from an effects standpoint. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah. It's an absolute sacrilege as a franchise entry, but as its own thing, I think I compared it to when we talk about Alien Resurrection between us, we always say it feels kind of like a Dark Horse comic spin-off weirdo, hey, let's do this with the property thing instead of a proper movie in the franchise. And that's what Jason Goes to Hell feels like to me. It's they just got to do whatever the hell they wanted. And in doing so, it's something that flies in the face of every other entry in the franchise. But I think, like you said when we were watching, it's that aspect has actually helped it age better.
Yeah, while it may not have been well received at the time, it definitely aged better, being more of its own thing.
I think we're firmly in the Jason Goes to Hell camp.
Yeah. Send me to hell with Jason. I'm there.
Yeah. So I will love to hear opinions about that, because that is a very strongly debated movie. But next week we will continue our Thanksgiving spread with something completely different. We're going to watch Roadhouse, a movie Travis and I both have not seen, and pretty much the only substantial thing I have been told about it is that Patrick Swayze rips a man's throat out.
I sincerely hope it's true. It better be true. If it's not true, I'm gonna be fucking pissed.
Yeah, we're gonna have words. Not you and I, but just words with the ghost of Patrick Swayze. Why aren't you ripping throats? Roadhouse is next week. I'm actually very excited for this because I'm going in totally blind. I haven't seen footage. I've seen a DVD cover of this movie, and I've known about it as a title, but that's it. So what's going to happen next week? You'll have to tune in and find out when we watch Roadhouse. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Dunk.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on Genre Vision.